Life is short, and we should embrace every day and not just stumble through it, needing to use a substance to get through it.
Welcome back to the DMF podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Isaacson. Thanks for joining me in another conversation highlighting a health topic that is impacting us today. We might all feel at times the need to escape and to fill a void in our lives. But for some of us, that might be the tipping point to a dark road of addiction. Thanks to technology, we have never before been so connected to one another. But are we truly connected to each other? In terms of real connections, we are struggling with that more than ever. And that isolation, that opens the door for addiction for a lot of people. Our guest today, Patty Sen, joins us with 23 years of experience as a licensed master addiction counselor. Patty leads the team at Soul Solutions Recovery Center, and she's passionate about helping people get well and live sober as they transition from short-term treatment to long-term recovery. Soul Solutions Recovery Center helps people find their unique path to recovery while providing an atmosphere of connection, hope, and healing. In this episode, Patty shares with us her thoughts and experience with addiction and how it's not simple, nor is it random. Nobody sets out to have a substance abuse disorder. It's one of the most complex health topics because there's so many factors impacting it. So as we unpack this whole issue, I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation, so let's get into it. All right, everyone, we are sitting down with Patty Sen today. Patty, it is so exciting to have you in our studio and get to have a conversation with you because, again, you are just a leader of light. You are representing our Leading with Light initiative every day in your work. I know you're wearing the shirt today. People can't see it, but I love it. So Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to have you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here today.
Yes. And, I already kind of mentioned that you are a leader of light, but I wanted to just highlight you as the executive director of Soul Solutions and just ask, why do you do what you do and what are you most passionate about in your role?
I do what I do for several reasons. First of all, I'm a person in long-term recovery, so my own journey has been an important part of Soul Solutions. And really, the passion lies in helping other people find their own journeys to recovery as well.
Yes. And, we've even talked before of just how addiction is not simple. It is such a complex health issue, and there's a lot of factors that go into it. And would you say there's a lot of misconceptions?
There's a ton of misperceptions regarding substance use disorders. I always say there's nothing easy or quick about talking about the story of addiction. There's many different paths, so to speak, that people get to the point where they have a substance use disorder. And the same thing on the other end. There's many different pathways to recovery as well.
Yes, and you're specifically working with people with substance abuse disorders, but there's many types of addictions out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of what we call the behavioral addictions. So the things like gambling, gaming, video games, things like that, shopping, eating, all of those types of behavioral addictions as well. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So what is the need for Soul Solutions and to have a recovery center? Like, is addiction that bad? And how does it compare between now versus maybe decades ago? What does it look like right now?
Yeah, I would say the need for places like Soul Solutions is greater than ever. I've been doing this work for about 25 years. And one thing that I have definitely noticed over time is that there are more people struggling with substance use disorders than ever before. More younger people are struggling with substance use disorders than ever before. And unfortunately, more people are dying as a result of their substance use disorders than at any other time. So in some respects, we are losing ground in terms of how we treat and how we help people. So the need is greater than ever.
Yeah. So in your words, why is it trending up and up, and specifically with the youth?
Yeah. Again, I think there's many factors. I don't think there's
it's not
one.
Simple.
There's not one quick answer to that. But I think there's probably several different things to look at. It's been 5 years, but COVID has certainly changed the trajectory of addiction in our community and in the country as a whole. That's certainly compounded people's sense of isolation and struggling with coping skills. And unfortunately, we continue to see kind of the domino effect of how people were impacted by the pandemic even today. So I think that's one thing. I think in general, we are less connected to other people than we've ever been. In some ways, we are more connected due to all of the technology that we have. But in terms of real, true connections, I think we're struggling with that more than ever. And that kind of opens a doorway to substance use for a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yes. And I love that you brought up connections, because to me, that is the heart of Soul Solutions. And I'll let you speak on that more, but just the way you guys welcome in your clients, your patients, and you walk alongside them for up to 5 years. And, you have your coffee shop and just everything is built off connection.
Yeah, I think that is the key to recovery. Addiction is often referred to as a disease of isolation, and the antidote to that is connections. And so we really try to do everything we can to foster community and connections with our people. As you said, we really emphasize a long-term recovery model for people. So it's not just a short-term in and out of treatment. That tends to lead to a revolving door where people are in and out of numerous treatment episodes. Yeah. And our approach is, let's work with you over longer periods of time than is traditional. And we find that really helps people in their early recovery. People struggle in early recovery, and oftentimes people struggle because it's not that they don't have good treatment, it's that they don't do sufficient treatment, if that makes sense. So we really emphasize working with people beyond the traditional primary care model. So we have recovery management models where people continue to attend those groups once a week, once every couple of weeks, depending on their situation. And we have people that have been in those groups for 1-2 years and beyond. We have people that are celebrating 1 year of recovery, 2 years of recovery, and up to 3 years of recovery that continue to attend those groups. And that's not the norm in terms of how treatment is typically done, but we feel very strongly that we want to provide that ongoing support for people and be with them and walk with them throughout their recovery journey.
Yes, there is beautiful things coming out of Soul Solution with stories of people, like you said, in those early years of recovery. There's a lot of relapse, there's struggle, there might be more isolation, you name it. Yeah. But it's just beautiful to know that you guys have people that you're walking alongside from that 3 to 5 benchmark years. And I wanted to ask, what stories or what experiences are these clients having, or what are they saying about this process?
Yeah, we get a lot of feedback in terms of people really appreciating the personal approach, the personal touch. People don't feel like a number at Soul Solutions, hopefully. We really take great effort to treat everyone as an individual. And, there's lots of stories of recovery. The headlines in the news is always about how addiction is impacting our community, and there's certainly lots of that, but there's lots of recovery that is happening in our community as well. And, the stories include people getting their lives back, basically getting their families back, reuniting with their children, all types of stories of recovery for people.
Yes. All right. Well, I want to take us back to just addiction as its whole. And again, maybe just some misconceptions around it. And one of my questions is just how addiction, yes, might be a symptom of, like you said, a disease of isolation. So what does that look like when we look at homelessness in our community, or we look at people that are hungry in our community, or, all these other factors that you might see along with someone who's struggling with addiction?
Yeah. So there's something called recovery capital that is an indicator of how much support a person has in terms of their recovery journey. And there's both internal recovery capital and then external recovery capital as well. And so to speak to some of the basic needs, if someone doesn't have their basic needs met, whether that is housing or food security or whatever it might be, they are really going to struggle with their substance use disorder and finding recovery. It's hard to focus on that journey if you don't know where you're going to sleep that night, or if you don't know where your next meal is going to come from. So there's an emphasis on helping people obtain more recovery capital, because that increases the likelihood of them being successful in their journey. But you got to take care of people's basic needs, first of all. And then also the community. The more support a person has, whether that's professional support or personal support through family and friends, the greater the likelihood that they are going to be successful.
Yeah. So are you guys getting referrals then from other community partners that might be tackling those other issues of homelessness and hunger, but that individual might also be struggling with a substance use disorder?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know.
And again, you got to meet the basic needs first before you really start to address their substance use disorder.
Yes. So tell me, what is the most common substance use that you're dealing with or talking about with your patients and clients?
Yeah. At Soul Solutions Recovery Center, it is hands down the alcohol that most of our patients struggle with. And I always say you hear a lot about the opioid epidemic, and there is absolutely an opioid epidemic in our community and in the country as a whole. But I challenge that and see it more as a substance use disorder epidemic, because it's not just the opioids, it's alcohol, it is marijuana, it is methamphetamines. And again, the substance we see the most of is alcohol use.
Yes, and you brought up marijuana too, but alcohol and marijuana, they're seen as, it's a social norm, it's recreation, it's in social situations, that's just what you do. So how do you tackle that personally, professionally? How do you go about that?
Yeah, there's certainly been a shift, especially in terms of marijuana use and the perception of it being a safe substance, especially with some of the legalization that we've seen throughout the country and in surrounding states. So there's more of a belief that marijuana is harmless and it's okay to use, and that is certainly true with the younger age groups as well. So we're having to challenge those misperceptions a lot more than 15, 20 years ago, because it is more and more viewed as safe and okay substance to use.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and same with alcohol then as well.
Absolutely. That has always been in the social fabric, so to speak, and so there's always discussions about how that impacts individuals in our community as a whole.
Did you know that medical expenses are the #1 cause of bankruptcy? If you want to help an individual or family experiencing a health crisis, loss of life, or other trauma, head to lendahandup.org to support a neighbor in need today. If you want to learn more about the silent epidemic of digital addiction, learn to spot the warning signs of child sexual abuse, or are interested in starting a charitable fund for a cause you're passionate about, head to dacmed.org today. So I want to open up the floor for you. What other misconceptions, perceptions are out there around addiction that you might see in your everyday, in your career, running Soul Solutions and the team, that the community members or the general public might not know?
Yeah. There's a couple that I always like to talk about because they are so important. The first misperception is that someone has to want recovery or to go to treatment in order for it to be helpful for them. And that is absolutely not true. And actually, the research supports the opposite. Oftentimes we hear from family members, well, they don't want to get help, so what's the point? And any type of leverage that we can use to kind of move someone into treatment and recovery is absolutely beneficial. There's a lot of people that start out externally motivated. They go to treatment because their family is threatening to leave them or they're at risk of losing their job or whatnot. And they're not happy about being in treatment, but they come reluctantly because their arm is being twisted, so to speak. And the process of treatment is what moves them to a place where they go from I'm here because I have to be to I'm here because I choose to be and I do want a different life. So this idea that you have to wait for someone with the addiction or substance use disorder to one day wake up and say, hey, I want to go to treatment is inaccurate. There's a lot of things that family members can do, and employers and things like that can support and move people through those different stages. I'm actually a product of external motivation for recovery. My family forced me into treatment many years ago, and to this day, I believe that it saved my life. I never would have been someone that was capable of making that decision on my own. The seriousness of my substance use disorder prevented me from seeing how bad I was, and I thought I was okay. So fortunately, my family stepped in, forced me into treatment, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me. So this idea that you have to want to be in treatment for it to be helpful is inaccurate. The other misperception that is pretty common is if someone has been in treatment maybe one or two times or several times in the past, they believe that going through treatment again will not be helpful. So sometimes you'll hear either from a patient or a family member, I've been through treatment before, it didn't work, so what's the point? And that is also not accurate. There's a lot of evidence that sometimes people need several treatments in order for them to get to where they need to be. And treatments really kind of stack on one another, so you can build off of past treatment episodes. You don't start over, so to speak. So this belief that, well, they've been through treatment before, it didn't work, so why should they do it again? That is also inaccurate. It sometimes just takes people a few attempts at it before they're able to maintain long-term recovery. But it absolutely does work, even if it takes you several attempts at it. And we don't treat anything else in that framework of, well, they've tried that before, it didn't work, why try again? One of the most important things in recovery is not quitting. And so being willing to come back, do treatment again, and learn from what went well in the past and what you need to continue to work on can be highly beneficial. Yeah,
I love that, the whole not quitting, because you're truly building that resilience then as they're finding a treatment model that works for them, whether that's several options that you have to go through. Like you're right, like you guys have a very unique approach. So that might be the final straw for someone that, yes, this finally worked for me. And I'm sure you get those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Every day. Some people come through one time and do well. Some people, they've been through several treatment episodes, and it's all about learning from what went well last time. What do we need to keep working on? But it's a journey. Recovery isn't an event. It's a journey. And everyone's journey looks a little bit different. But as long as someone is willing to keep coming back and keep working at it, the likelihood is that they will eventually get it.
Yes. So I want to go back a little bit to your first misperception that you shared with us and how you said something about even in your own experience, you thought you were okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But other people were recognizing that maybe something was really wrong, and they highlighted that for you, which then motivated you to get help. For anyone listening that maybe has someone in their life that goes about their day, they use some sort of substance to cope, to get through the day, they think they're okay. For those family members or that individual that might be listening, how would you encourage them to think differently?
I would encourage people to look at quality of life. So oftentimes people say, well, I'm still working, I'm still paying the bills, therefore I must not have a problem. And I always encourage people to look at what's the quality of your life, though. Are you happy? How are your relationships? And there's a big distinction that I like to talk about is, are you existing or are you living your life? And I think in substance use disorders, people fall into they're just existing. They're quote unquote stumbling through the day. They're getting through the day. But are they living their life to their fullest potential? Probably not. And I think that's something very important to look at, because life is short, and we should be we should embrace every day and not just stumble through it, needing to use a substance to get through it.
Yes, and that might be a soft way to start a conversation with someone, is just asking about their quality of life. Yeah.
Actually, we're working with someone now, and he just happened to make a comment of how his wife asked him, hey, are you happy? And that led to a discussion on, well, no, I'm not happy. And that led to a discussion on, well, what's going on with your alcohol use? And that was what started that conversation, and that's what got that person eventually to seek help with just that simple, hey, you don't seem happy. Mm-hmm. How are you doing?
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I know you guys have a lot of programs as well for family support, because that's a whole nother piece, is addiction doesn't just affect that individual using of that substance, it affects their family and their support system.
Absolutely. Addiction is often described as a family illness, and at Soul Solutions, we firmly believe that, and we really emphasize supporting the family members as well. So we have a family program that is open to any family member, loved one that has someone that is struggling with their substance use. It's open to anyone in our community, whether or not their loved one is in any of our programs. Because we feel that's a bit of an unmet need in our community. Is where do the family members go? Where do they figure out how to navigate this stuff? And there's not a lot of resources for family members, so we wanted to be a place where families and loved ones could come in, talk about it, because they oftentimes have a lot of guilt and shame and anger and all of the feelings that go into having a loved one that is struggling with addiction, and giving them an opportunity to find their own recovery independent of their loved one. Family members deserve an opportunity to get well and be well in their own recovery journey too.
Yes, I love how you always say that, is get well and be well.
Yeah.
To live a sober life.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have so much amazing messaging, and clearly we could sit down and talk for a very long time, because addiction, again, is so complex and it's not simple. So thank you for highlighting so much around addiction so that we can just learn more. I sure learned a lot as well. And so thank you so much for just being here. But I wanted to allow you to share how people can get involved with Soul Solution, or what that process to get someone or themselves in the door at Soul Solution, whether that's a family program, a recovery treatment, or just how they can help and get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. It starts with just reaching out. soulsolutions.org has all of our contact information, and whether you're someone struggling with a substance use disorder or have a loved one who's struggling, just give us a call and we will help you figure it out from there. We do a lot of what we call free information sessions, where you just come in, talk about what's going on, and we'll help you navigate some options. And we want to be a place where people can come and start to figure this stuff out. We want to be a resource for people, and we want to help people on start their journeys to recovery.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And it is a beautiful journey that you are walking alongside people with. And I just, again, thank you, because you are shining light in a lot of the darkest areas of people's lives. And that's hard. That's hard work. So thank you to you and your team. You guys have an incredible mission and an incredible program. So I sure appreciate having you guys in our community. So again, thank you. Is there any last things that you wanted to share with everyone listening? I just want to open up for you.
Yes, you talk about this is a complex, difficult disease, but I think everyone at Soul Solutions, myself included, does this because there is hope and there is help, and people can have a different life. Recovery is not only possible, it's probable. So I want to always give that message of hope out there, and I don't care if this is your first time taking a run at it or your 10th time. There is help and hope out there, so never give up, because recovery does happen each and every day in our community, and there's lots of people that have reclaimed their lives back from addiction.
So encouraging. Thank you so much for sharing those words. All right, Patty, thank you. We look forward to hopefully having you on the podcast again, but again, just thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much.
I hope today's episode really hit home with you. As we all know of or have had someone in our lives that struggles with addiction, it sure hits home with me because I work closely with addiction-related causes here at DMF. And what I've learned and what Patty shared today is that addiction is a disease of isolation, and recovery is successful when people are more connected and surrounded by community. Again, we live in a world where we are so connected due to technology, but are we truly building the connections that matter most? I'm very thankful for Patty and the team at Soul Solutions for how they offer support for substance use disorders and how they help people get well and live sober. If you or someone you know is looking for support, you can check out more at soulsolutions.org. All right, folks, that's a wrap for today. Thank you so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll catch you next time on the DMF podcast. And remember, we are called to serve.